Hello and good afternoon from Geneva. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Sudha Chakravarti, the head of research at EU Business School, and it gives me great pleasure to invite and welcome each and every one of you, the participants as well as the speakers, to our research conference hosted by ONResearch, which is the research platform for EU Business School. The purpose of this conference is to promote discourse and to keep the conversation and the dialogue going on topical issues. We do live in strange times, and certainly the pandemic situation has definitely disrupted the way we carry on with our day-to-day activities, from business to international development, how we make consumer choices, and so on and so forth. So today you will have the opportunity to hear as well as view 4 excellent paper presentations on topical and interdisciplinary issues. So since we live in strange times and during this COVID period, the connecting theme will be the evolution of the post-COVID landscape. So in this regard, to jump into the program in itself, we have 4 paper presentations. We will start with Vanessa Tribe, who has a very, very interesting topic, that is how Darwin and X-Men can help you find a job in the sport industry. Following that, we will have Bill Morrison, Raphael Klein, and Margarita Pugac presenting on the death of content marketing. After that, we will jump straight into fashion and luxury during the pandemic, and this will be presented by Leslie Lawson-Botez. And last but not the least, we will jump to international development issues, where Ugo Ikpeazu and Godwin Abaimun will be presenting their paper on business in special context, particularly in underserved communities. Now, I'll be moderating most of these conversations, and I will once again jump in during the closing notes. But I would like to pass on the floor to Margarita Pugac, who's a research associate and who's behind the conduction of this research conference. She will take you through some of the housekeeping rules before we start. Margarita.
Thank you, Sudha. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to have you all here for our research conference. Just several quick notes on the technical part. First of all, this session is being recorded, and we will later distribute this recording through our social media platforms, and you will also receive the copy. Then everyone from the participants is muted upon your entrance in the conference, and I will then ask our speakers to unmute themselves. So please just accept when I'm asking you to unmute. And of course, for all the participants and our speakers, in case you have any questions, we have the chat there. On the bottom, you will see the chat icon. Just click on it, and if you have any questions, please type in there below. And after each presentation, we will have a Q&A session where we will answer your questions. This is all from me, Sudha.
Thank you, Margarita. So without further ado, we will jump straight into the first presentation, because the elephant in the room is the time. And presenting the first paper, a very interesting paper on how Darwin and X-Men can help you find a job in the sport industry. And again, the special focus will be on the post-COVID landscape. And here we have Vanessa Tribe, who is also the professor of sports management at EU Business School. Vanessa, you have the floor.
Actually, hello, Sudha. I'm really pleased to see you today. Actually, my camera has not been allowed yet, so I'll be, yes, thank you. Start my video right now. So thank you for your introduction. Yes, indeed. Actually, I am professor at EU Business School, specialized for the sport management and career advisor. And I've been living in Geneva for 10 years now, running a consulting company focused on the sport industry, which is actually the reason why I am here today presenting this research. So together, we are going to talk about human resources, sports, Darwin, and genetics. So that's a program. So the heart, let me just share my screen right now so you can have the presentation with me. You just see everything right now. Right? Yeah. So the heart of the presentation today is actually to discuss about the COVID crisis and the difficult periods it has left us. So there were indeed some terrible consequences, but today I would like to discuss about the positive aspect of this crisis. But there is always one. People took around the globe the time to slow down the rhythm of their life. They took the time for themselves, they took the time to ask questions about their personal achievements, the priorities in their life, and they realized for some of them that they were not happy at work for some reason. Maybe they didn't share the value of the company anymore. Maybe they couldn't evolve in the department they were working in. So they just realized that they needed some changes. So when you have the time to think and you realize that you have some change to do, you take action, right? So that's actually the reason why for the career advisor, it has always been a very busy period, I have to say. So we help them to realize that the priority here in their life is about passion. And for some of them, passion was linked to sports, which is the reason why they changed the career plan and discover the sport industry. Sport industry is actually, well, the answer for some of the person who wanted to reorganize their career. And it's actually a good thing because the sport industry has been open to business profiles since a few decades because they wanted to have a new overview of the market. So that's good. People who want to reorientate themselves in the sport industry is actually open. The a little bit less positive aspect is that as a lot of persons has realized that sport was the answer to their question, there is even more candidates on the market, which means that there is even more competition on a market which was already very competitive. So in order to adapt to the crisis, sport industry companies have been reorganizing the recruitment practices. They needed to adapt to the new amount of applications they did receive. But even though the recruitment process have been frozen for most of the companies because, well, nobody knows exactly where we are going to be in a few months. So it means that on the market, there are a lot less job offer. There is an increase of the candidate on the market, which means that there is an equality in the balance. So you need to fight even more if you want to be noticed as the candidates on this market, which is the reason why you could compare yourself to an Olympic gamer, an Olympic athlete, and you want to compete with the other candidates, and you try to be actually the best. Or if we go according to Darwin, you have to be the fittest. I'm not meaning fit like fitness, I'm meaning fit like adaptable. The human resources department mission is actually to match the expectation of the company here with the candidate skills. So they need to look for the perfect fit with the candidate, which means that when you are sending your application, you should not prove that you are the best. You should actually prove that you are the fittest, which means that it's actually really the work of Darwin, saying that you are the most adaptable according to a specific environment. This is the reason why, or the possibility to leg the legacy through the century, having a genetic legacy through the century for the species, of course, but also in your career. Let's see how we can use this information as a candidate looking for a job. Here you have a picture. Let's figure out if you can see all the details. We have two butterflies, two different kinds of foods, one dark, one light. And actually, if the butterfly wants to survive to the predator, they need to be in the specific environment that belongs to them. I don't know if you notice the black butterfly on the black wood, but it's kind of hidden. On the opposite, the white butterfly on the dark wood is definitely very visible. So if they want to survive, they need to be each in their personal specific environment, which means that, well, if you want to have an advantage at as a candidate on the company environment, you need to have at least being the fittest on this specific environment, like here the butterfly, or if you are the white butterfly in the dark wood, you have as a human being the advantage that the butterfly does not have. You can change your environment thanks to an additional additional diploma or thanks to soft skills that you can develop, for example. That's actually the human adaptation and evolution that you can develop thanks to your soft skills and hard skills. That's actually also something you can develop through the epigenetic, but that's something we are going to see a little bit further than that. So if we just do a summarize here, you can compare somehow the birds and the candidates. Here the birds have specific beaks according to their fooding environment, and here for you as a candidate, you need to develop and have your own specific skills if you want to value your profile in a company. You need to have your specific tools. So I think the conclusion right here is crystal clear. You need to use your own tools as a candidate in order to be efficient in your job research during this COVID-19 crisis. What's also important to realize is that genetically, you have some competitive advantage. I think that it's especially true for the athletes. Let's see an example. Some genes are responsible for the synthesis of the muscles protein called alpha-actin 3. According to the type of allele in your genetic code, you will be more performant. So that's specifically belonging to you. It's something you cannot change. And it means that each of us have our own specific genetic advantage, competitive advantage on the market. Thanks to the epigenetic we are doing some research on, we can say that we could also have an impact on the intellectual and sportive performances, which means that it opens a world of opportunities here. So currently, companies are focusing on the hard skills and the soft skills, but very soon we can assume that the company will have a look also at your genes and your epigenetics opportunities. According to the Max Planck Institute, the gene affecting our communication skills, which is quite important in the work environment, right? This one is related to the gene for psychiatric disorder. So that's kind of strange, right? So our professional performances are directly linked to our genes, which means that it's not only a question of brain capacity, it's also a question of personality, which means that genes have impact on our professional evolution. That genes are coming also from our parents. That's something clear and well announced, which means that maybe we can raise some question here. If the genes have an impact on our professional career, can we say that our parents have some impact on our career? Or maybe can we ask ourselves, is it possible to change our genetic codes in order to change our career? Well, stop. Be careful with the shortcut, because here it's very important to realize that through the century, people have thought about some superior gene theory, mainly in order to justify some war and some genocide. So that's definitely not what I want to say here today. Genetic research, human resource departments, and research needs to really follow some strict ethic rules. Keep that in mind for the next step of this presentation, because genetics have an impact in your life, that's important, but you have the possibility to change also the path of it, thanks to the epigenetic. That's what we are going to see after this reminding of the Darwin theory. So it applies, it's important to realize that Darwin worked on a theory that applies to all organic species. The basic principles here of evolution and the simple, it looks very simple, but actually it was not that obvious a few decades ago. So that's very important. Let's translate that for a student looking for a job. Yeah. So let's see how we can adapt. Well, actually, for students, it's exactly the same thing. Each candidate is unique. Each candidate have some traits and competencies that they can pass from generation to generation, thanks to the genetics indeed, but also maybe from the epigenetic. There are more candidates than job opportunities, which means that we can also do a parallel with the fact that there were more offspring that are born than they can survive. That's a clear parallel that we can do here. And also, well, the survivor here, the candidates selected, are the ones who will follow their career in the company and evolve. So let's see here, according to you, if we do have a possibility to pass, some competitive advantage through the generation? That's a question that we can ask. Let's go a little bit beyond the genetic and look the analyze here. So that's a little bit biological aspect that you are going to see here, but you will see that it's important to keep the relation with the human resources and the recruitment process. Just a few descriptions just to make you clear how it works. In the body, you have differentiated cells. You have chromosomes with two legs that we call chromatid. Inside these legs, you do have the DNA, which means that you include in this part the genetic legacy coming from your parents. In the gene, there are something called allele, and each allele produce a very specific characteristic that can be different from people. It can be, for example, the blood type. It's very specific for each of us. And the blood type here that we can see, it's based on a chromosome with the related gene. Each parent, as you can see here, have some specific allele, and two allele with different characteristics. And through the reproduction process that I'm not going to details here, you can see that there are 4 options for the children according to these two parents. So this is actually how the information goes from one generation to another. That's the main information I wanted to mention here. Just a small note, you can see that some allele needs two similar characteristics to be expressed, like for example, the O blood type, which is called recessive, and it's important for the next step. And some allele need only one, which means that the allele is dominant. Let's just have a look here. That's the same question with the color of the eyes. Here, if we can use only the first column, we can see that parents with brown eyes can actually have children with brown, blue or green eyes. That's weird because that's not what was mentioned in the previous slides. Here, what's amazing to realize is that you have information that can pass through the generation without even being noticed by the person, including the genetic information, which means that here, the reason why the parents can have children with blue eyes, it's because they had both of them blue eyes allele, which was recessive, which was transmitted by the grandfather and grandmother to the parents. As it was recessive, it was not expressed to both of them. And then the children have the possibility to express a characteristic which was not visible to the parents, which means that here we can ask a lot of questions about how to transfer skills or characteristic from generation to another that can also be sometimes hidden somewhere in the genetic codes. So that's something clear and visible. Color of the eyes, everyone can see it. What about soft skills? Like, for example, negotiation skills. Can we transmit that also to our children or grandchildren through the age? That's actually very interesting because it would mean that some candidates will have competitive advantage thanks to the previous generation. That's actually a very good question here. How could that happen? Just again, a small description here. In your DNA, you have something called the RNA who will do a complementary copy of your DNA. So what makes you who you are. Let's not go too much in the details, but let's say that the DNA and the RNA are very important for your well-being and your survival. And the RNA will just do a copy of one part of the DNA. Sometimes it happens like any other mass action, the RNA make a mistake. It happens. And this mistake is actually called a mutation. So it's actually a quite interesting thing that we are all mutants because mutations are very often happening in our body, but we don't notice it often. That's actually very simple consequences. So we are all mutants, and mutation can happen for a lot of different reasons. It can lead to a lot of different mutation types. that we are not going to see here, but you can see that there is a huge range of mutations. So actually, it's just a way to say that we are evolving in our body, in our cells. It's not that common to become an X-Men with superpower, but we are all mutants here. So how to use this mutation through the evolution and to make you stand out of the crowd as a candidate? Well, actually, first realize that all the mutations are not that, well, good. Most of them are not viable. So here you have to think about what you might be as a mutant, saying that if the mutation in your body, in your cells, is viable, it's something that you are going to transmit to the whole next generation of population, which means that you are definitely part of the evolution of the species, which is quite interesting and not bad. You can maybe put that in your CV, making the species, the human species, evolve. That could be interesting. I'd like to know the feedback of the recruitment team there. We have seen the genetic here, so something really clearly written in your body, in your cells. Now we are going to talk about the epigenetic, something that you can develop somehow, but we don't have yet exactly the traceability. Just to give you a concrete example about epigenetism, it's the example of the turtle. The turtle just, you know, they are born on a beach, and then they live their lives all around the sea, and they travel and everything. And every time when it's a laying period, they come back exactly at the same place where they were born. How do they do that? How do they communicate? How can they find, again, this information? That's where epigenetic can explain this action, saying that, well, there is an information transmitted not through the DNA, but through something else called epigenetic, saying, okay, I give you an information, I give you a skill, I transmit something to you, and you will use it. You will know something without knowing from where it comes, but it's something, you know, deep inside your knowledge. The research have been also proved thanks to the cute little worms here on the right, called elegans. Let's say that this research has proved that through 40 generations of worms, they have been able to transmit the information of where they should pick the food up, meaning that through 40 generations, they were able to transmit an information. So the question here is, how could a family transmit skills, information to you as a candidate, as a young professional in your life, in your career? That's a question that we can ask. Is your grandfather an intensive sports practicer, for example? Maybe thanks to its sport activity, he will develop the longevity of his life and transmit through the epigenetic to use the same skills, the same information on your cells, how to live longer thanks to the perfection of the cell through the sport activity. Sport activities definitely change the DNA and the action of your life. So that's proven record. Let's see how the gene can then develop that through the epigenetism. Actually, the epigenetism is the analysis of the change in the gene function that do not involve change in the DNA sequence. So it's really the question of function. If we go a little bit deeper and we come back to the main subject here, the final question could be, could you heritage from your, for example, innovative brain of your grandmother? Could you heritage from the negotiation skills of your father? That will be the research, that's a research that we have been doing here, that we are continuing to do. And that's opening an amazing number of opportunities here in the human resources research, because if we realize that we can share and transmit skills through the age, you can be sure that, well, that's something that you will be able to value somehow in your application, and you will definitely develop more skills, hard skills or soft skills. It will be something valuable that you can transmit to your next generation. So actually here, I want to conclude with this information. Sport industry is a definitely competitive world. It's even more competitive now with the COVID crisis. So you have to be different. You have to fight for your place. You have to really value yourself on the market and be different. You need to find a job where you can be the fittest in this environment. And for that, you can either upgrade your skills, either find a better place to work with normal environments that fits you best, that you can discuss with career advisor with no problem. And you also need to understand that maybe through your genes, you have some competitive advantage to value in your career. And sometimes also, you also need to understand that epigenetic will be a good tool for you in the next step of your career in order to be the next marketing manager of your federation or whatever the skills or the objectives that you do have. So I wish you good luck in your research. I will be available through LinkedIn or through the OU Business School, of course, if you have any question about that. And I'll be happy to let the next research develop the ideas they have had. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. That was a very interesting presentation. In 20 minutes, you jumped from Darwin, the survival of the fittest, to epigenetics, to mutation, and finally to how it relates to the finding jobs in the sports industry. So does anybody have a question? Please do ask our speakers as many questions. If you have, use the chat box. I have a question. I will read them out one by one.
Okay.
Your genes will be on your resume for job applications in the future. And this is from Yarasil.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. There are a lot of movies about this kind of opportunities or kind of, situation. I do hope it will not be exactly the case, because we cannot presume a human being just through the gene. Well, you have seen maybe Gattaca or any fictional movie like that. There are a lot of soft skills that can also be added to your application, but we never know. Application could include genetic information maybe later and could orientate your career somehow. So it's actually up to us to really be focused on the ethic, on the genetic analysis. That's the reason why I really push a point here. Be careful. We should be careful about how to use this information, this personal information, how to use it on a valuable way, and how to avoid any bad use of the genetic information concerning your own personal genetic information.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that answer. We have another question from Sumant. Any successful mutations over natural selections to pass through generations happens over a large number of generations, not just one or two. So how can we equate that with humans?
And yeah, actually, that's a main question here. That's epigenetic is actually a very new way of research, I would say. That's the reason why the small worm experience here was incredibly teachable for us. I think that, okay, the animals, there are different kind of species who really use that, I won't say daily, but they use that every year in their evolution, in their life. And human, actually, we are also an animal species. We are just more evaluate somehow, but we also have our background and our genes coming from the same heritage, the same first duplicated cells. So the question is actually, do we have the same capacity to develop maybe a knowledge or transferable skills, or is it something that has been different between the human being and the animals and the development of each species? That's actually the thing that we are analyzing currently. That's the reason why the question about understanding how the skills could be transmitted from human generation is fascinating, because if it's the case, then we can open a lot of doors into personal development opportunities.
Thank you, Vanessa. Just quickly, because we're running out of time and the other presenters are ready, just a quick question again. You spoke about, of course, mutation and how humans we mutate, and that's a normal process. Of course, what we see, at least with the pandemic, also the situation is mutating. And particularly in regard to the post-pandemic landscape, would you have any advice? I'll take you up on your conclusion. Any specific advice to students who are seeking jobs in the sports industry? If you could be very quick with your answer. Now, before you answer this, we have the chat on. Vanessa, if you could go back, there are a few more comments, etc. I will let you respond to that later as the other presenters are speaking. So Vanessa, the last word to you.
Yeah, so I'll answer shortly here. I will give 3 recommendations. First, indeed, most of the company have frozen the recruitment until January 21. So what I could recommend here is just get the company, know the company and know the person working there. Maybe there are some maternity leaves that will open doors for you, that will allow you to put a fit somehow in the company, show your capacities and your skills. And when the person will come back again, then of course you leave the job, that's ethical, but the company will know how you work, how you will be involved if they recruit you, and you can be sure that as soon as they can recruit again, they will contact you, because they will always need people who can be invested in the company and they are sure about the skills. So that's the first thing. The other thing would be actually to think about the fact that, well, companies cannot hire anymore, but they can still pay invoices somehow. Means that you cannot be hired because of the taxes, because of all the process. The recruitment process takes a lot of time and energy and actually money as well. But maybe if you propose your services as an independent, well, you will be somehow hired because you will have work and you will promote your skills and you will develop your competencies, but you will be as an independent, so you will send invoice instead of contract. It's a little bit less stable and sure for the situation, because we never know exactly who will be the next person paying for your invoice. But if you don't want to stay at home doing nothing and couldn't find a job, that could be actually one of the solutions, because they definitely need people to do the jobs. So the company are not stopping. It's just that they stopped the recruitment. If you don't want to be independent, you can also become just volunteer. Doing some volunteers work is not only about sport events around the lake. It's also being involved in the communication, in the community management, finance and everything. It can give a great support to the company. And again, they will hire the person they trust and they have a proven record about. As soon as they will be able to hire again, they will hire you more than someone else that they don't know. I hope it was short enough. I'll be happy to continue to answer to the question through the chat or through any other.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And yes, that was excellent recommendations for students, and particularly during this very uncertain period in the job market. Thank you once again. We will jump directly to the next presentation. And please do, if you have any questions, please do use the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you, Shura. We would like today with Bill Morrison and Raphael Klein introduce our article on the death of content marketing. And I would like Bill to begin.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for this chance to discuss our short white paper. You'll notice we've chosen a very challenging title. We've called it The Death of Content Marketing because we want to challenge the idea of content marketing very strongly. And let me explain what I mean by that. For many, many years, all of us who were involved in marketing saw a relatively static landscape. Things didn't change very much. Many of you, for example, were familiar with this book, Philip Kotler on Marketing. Now, this book is old as me, and the 4 Ps of marketing and SWOT analyses and all these various things, they were true when I started the industry, and pretty much they've stayed true. So the classic marketing wasn't really changed very much. There was advertising and there was basically PR and a bit of below the line activity. Then roughly a decade ago, when new technologies came to the fore, we were promised some very radical transformation. We were promised a new way of marketing, which became known as content marketing. And the whole idea would be that we could change how customers and companies could interact with each other. Now, myself and my two co-authors spent some time looking at three questions. One, what were the promises that were made by content marketing? What does it really mean, and what expectations were set? Margarita was the one who looked at that. What does it mean, and what's its history? Second one, the nasty one, was me. How is it done? Let's assess the success of content marketing. Has it actually worked, and does it work? Then possibly the hardest part was Klein Raphael's, who said, okay, assuming that there's still a lot of work to do here, that we've not created the perfect marketing concept, what does the future of marketing potentially look like? So we asked those three questions. I'm going to ask Margarita a little bit to help redefine what content marketing means. But let me just put this in real context for you. Look at your email entry today and yesterday. How many invitations have you received to download something or attend a webinar or sign up for a newsletter? All of this is content marketing. And how many of those are actually influencing the decisions that you make? And how many of those are really just beautifully formatted, very well focused spam? My contention, because I'm the one who did some of the assessing on this, is the vast majority of what is called content marketing is nothing more than stuffing electronic leaflets through doors. It is not very well aligned to the human being. It doesn't really move an organization forward. It doesn't serve its basic purpose. And the problem with this is there are hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of millions of hours of professional activity being funneled into this activity. And we're not entirely sure if it's the right direction at all. And I think one of the things that we're strongly saying in our little white paper is we're doing a lot more action than we are having impact. Before I say anything else, because obviously I'm quite passionate about this topic, I'm going to just take a little step back, and I'm going to ask Margarita to define a little bit, what did we mean when we said content marketing? Margarita.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. So we've been talking about content marketing term, which only became popular in maybe 2010. Before, as Bill mentioned, the more marketing management by the companies was pretty much defined. There have been some theories developed in the 20th century, and suddenly in 2010 we have a content marketing, which was defined as the marketing technique on creating and distributing valuable, relevant, and really useful content for the audience to find, use, and drive them in order to make a purchase. And the really important words here is the content, which is relevant, helpful, educational. This content becomes so high quality that companies are really becoming half publishers rather than just focusing on creating their products, their services, and delivering what they were doing before. And this would create a valuable relationship between the producer and the potential customer, because every time you would think about the product, you would want to stick to the company which really gave you all the information. It guided you towards the purchase. It didn't just advertise your product, it explained you why this product is so great. It explained you about the whole industry, about the maybe ingredients were used, about the technology being used. It's been useful. It's not just pushing towards a purchase and not screaming at you buy now, price reduction, etc. But this idea of providing useful content for the potential customers for the educational purposes is not new, actually. It has been popularized in 2010, but the actual idea already came in 1895 when one of the manufacturers of agricultural machines, John Deere, has launched The Furrow. It's a magazine with a lot of great content about how to use machinery, how to improve your agricultural operations. And it was really used by farmers to see what they can do better, how they can expand their businesses. And of course, later they were coming back to this producer when they wanted to make a purchase. But then how come it only became popular in 2010 is because of all the technological development, especially now in the context of world being shut down. All the information is being published online. A lot of great content, educational, entertaining, is being published. It's overwhelming, but it made it possible for this concept to really start being used and buzzing around the experts. But now there are a lot of content being published, which is great from one side, because as a customer you can find anything you want, but from the view of the company, how can you really differentiate? And there were a lot of promises made by the companies that this new concept will make you a publisher. This will make people trust your company. If you deliver them great content, that they will really come back to you. And it's so much more cost efficient than traditional marketing. The information you are sharing is great, and you are being honest with your customers, and they can always come back to you if they need you. There has been around 9,000 publications on Amazon about this concept. And this really means that this is a great hot topic, promising great results. But will all the investment really generate the desired profits? Bill?
That's a great question. Now, this is one of these times we have to go to cause and effect, linkage. As Mika said, there are 9,000 publications available on this topic already, so it's massively popular. And some of the reasons are, one, it's cheap. Virtually every company you talk to now that's trying to communicate, say things like, we're trying to establish thought leadership. We're trying to provide value to our prospective customers. Therefore, we will take something we already have, our knowledge, and publish it and give it away. Now, a lot of very successful companies do this. But are they successful because they do that? Now, on cause and effect, let's be very clear here. The rain creates puddles. That's cause and effect. Monday does not cause Tuesday. Just because a lot of companies do a lot of content marketing and they're successful doesn't mean the two are automatically connected. Now, when you take a step back and you look at the results in a year, you find out some pretty shocking things. Most organizations will tell you the vast majority of content which is created by their marketing teams is not used in any part of the sales process. It exists entirely in isolation. So you have teams of people producing lots of information, but it doesn't impact the commercial future of the organization. And you find a lot of organizations out there who are trying to do something and they're doing half of something, in fact, considerably less than half of something. What we found, when we look at content marketing, is there are so many things that you got to have right. If you miss any one of those things, the chain breaks. It's a bit like a convoy that moves at the speed of the slowest element. If any part is missing, it simply won't work. And what happens is you do turn your marketing department into a publication department, generating lots and lots and lots of content, very often filling the inboxes of all your prospective clients in here for no valid commercial purpose. Now, the research is there. As you'll see in our white paper, we like to go to, if you like, very frontline publications. So Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan have both been very clear on this. Content marketing is not producing the results. And one of the biggest reasons for this is the complexity. Organizations have set themselves up to publish, so they publish. But they haven't set themselves up to genuinely create a relationship with the target market. That's what they haven't done. So we said, okay, well, this is patently not living up to expectations. We wanted more from content marketing than we're currently getting. What's going wrong and what possible future direction do we have? Which is the area that Raphael picked up on. So Raphael, if you can explain a little bit of your content.
Thank you, Bill. So what Bill said was quite interesting, is that it's all about actually creating a relationship with the customer. And the only way to do that is if you actually engage with the customer and if the customer engages back. So it's about a two-way communication. Now, content marketing is a one-way communication because essentially it's the company talking to the customer and the customer doesn't really get a chance to communicate back. So yeah, essentially content marketing is too complex. It's taking up way too much time from businesses. They're focusing their resources on publication efforts. And what companies need to do now is no longer focus on creating content, but focus on creating engagement. And by producing engagement in the form of a community, then organizations can really optimize the use of key resources, which are their customers. So a couple months back, I actually attended a virtual roundtable by Sandler Training. And one of the attendees mentioned something very relevant to the research that I've been conducting, which is your customer is your solution. And that actually, there's a lot to this, meaning that your customer has actually all of the solutions to what you're looking for. And if you don't talk to your customer, if the customer doesn't get a chance to talk to you, then you're essentially going to be guessing what it is that your customer wants. So that's not going to bring you the results that you're looking for. So basically the research that I've been conducting is everything to do with communities and how you can create a community for your business that will really respond to the needs of your customers and optimize your customers for them to become your advocates, to recognize them for their advocacy, for them to participate in growing your company in terms of innovation and giving you insights, and even for them to be part of the customer service. So essentially, it's all about creating a community for your customers and for them to be able to talk to you and for you to be able to talk to them and also them to be able to talk to each other.
Great. Okay, so just a little bit to summarize this and what do we do with this information? Here's some bullet points for you. First of all, content marketing is extremely appealing because one, we can see a lot of activity. Two, it's very cheap. We love cheap. Now, it's becoming a publications industry, and here's the single biggest problem with it. We tend to get in any process the result we're trying to achieve. Content marketing, by its definition, is trying to generate lots and lots of content. And it's very good at doing that. That's its objective. Raphael points to a great thing. We've got to change, we've got to challenge our objective, and our objective must be, to what extent does this activity create engagement? To what extent does my activity create engagement? And it may sound a strange thing to do. If you talk to marketing leaders all around the world, very few people ask themselves that question. We see so many seminars, so many online sessions, so many newsletters, and it's basically blasting information out with little or no opportunity for it to come back. Now, when you do see communities working properly, and we all live in a bit of a consumer world, if you look at products such as Harley Davidson, which I think Raphael looked at in her part of the paper, you'll see an organization that interacts with its community. Now, I work in very boring industries. I work in industrial organizations that do X-ray machines and things like that. Those people are exactly the same. You must find a way of not just seeing your market as a bunch of consumers, but as part of the community that will ensure the success of your organization going forward. And you cannot live in a community without creating that engagement. Now, we're very lucky, there's already some very early stage thinking as to what that engagement looks like, and I'm happy to say that's in the white paper. So please have a good read of that narrative. Any questions, please let us know. In the meantime, any questions, we're happy to answer any questions or challenges you may have.
Perfect. Let's see if we have any questions about the content marketing. I think we're being just very clear with our topic.
That's what I think. Yeah. I will ask everyone, please do a bit of research yourself. Look at your email entry. How many things do you get from organizations, and how many of those things are genuine opportunities for you to engage with people who want to engage with you? What extent have you been asked to take part in the community? Okay, that's it from us. Thank you.
Participants, please feel free to post your questions. I can see Professor Ko there. You might have some questions on content marketing. Professor, if you can hear me. Otherwise, please do feel free to use the chat box and ask questions. We have the papers
We have a
submitted.
question from Professor Kuo.
Yes, we do have it.
Why
Why
do
do companies like John Deere and Blendtec stand out with their contents?
It's a great question. Margarita, you know a bit more about John Deere than I do. Can you answer this one first?
Well, John Deere is great just because there was zero competition and he was the first one. He did use a combination of this classical marketing because they did do the printing, they did a proper journal, they have distributed it, they spent a good amount of money on research, but I'm sure that they did get a good return on the sales.
I'll tell you another big thing behind that. John Deere were farmers. John Deere made equipment for farmers because they were farmers. And so often they would publish the magazine, quite a famous publication in its time called the Furrow magazine. But most of the articles didn't come from John Deere. They came from farmers. That's how they did it. At a very early stage, you know, almost by accident, they got it right. Now, so many things that we see that are not done that way. They're done without engagement. It's a great question. And again, I ask you, look at the content marketing materials that you see. Are they people talking at you, or is it people who want to talk with you? And many of us are also involved in this world. A little bit guilty sometimes too.
Good. I think we're good.
I think we're good. Okay. I look forward to any comments you have on the little article. Thank you.
Sudah?
Thank you very much, Bill, Rafael, and Margarita. We will move on to our next presentation, and that'll be by Leslie Lawson-Bortes. And from the depth of content marketing, we'll move to the world of fashion and luxury. Margarita, I think you'll be assisting with this presentation. So I will leave it to both Margarita as well as Leslie. Thank you so much.
Professor Lawson, I think we can now hear you. Just to introduce that Professor Lawson is a professor at EU Business School, specializing in design and luxury industries specifically. Professor, the floor is yours.
Margarita. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you about some of the findings of the impact of the pandemic on the fashion and luxury industries, but from the historical perspective, because it seems to me that in order to make predictions about the future, we have a lot to learn from the past. So I'm going to take you through a whirlwind tour of the last 600 years. We're going to, first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to write this paper. First of all, we'll look at the Middle Ages, Calvin here in Geneva, and how luxury spending was controlled because there was so much of it. Then we'll go to the 17th century and the first examples of protective clothing. 19th with crinolines, and then the end of the trailing skirt, which was spreading diseases and germs. We'll come through into the 20th century with the Spanish flu and the widespread wearing of masks, sometimes effective, sometimes not, which carries on into the 21st with fashion as a spatial barrier, and the political crises and global warming that we know today. I'll then make some conclusions and talk a little bit about my future research. Next slide. So how did I come to write and research, first of all, this particular article? It began with the semi-confinement that we had here in Switzerland in March, April. And I, like all of us, was bombarded with huge amounts of media information about the economic disasters we were about to enter into, in particular for the luxury and fashion fields, and what could they possibly do about it. And it seemed to me that there were lessons that we could learn from the past, and it would be interesting to look back. I was lucky enough at the time that one of my fashion and luxury master's students, Natalia Shemiakina, was here in Geneva. She's an art historian, so she assisted with the research for this. And so one of the first things that came out of this, of course, is that fashion, of course, which is as well clothing, one of its main roles is to protect us. And so an example of this is the shoulder pad. And we'll look through history and see how shoulder pads, and indeed many other examples of fashion, have provided protection. And this is still carrying on. This is from Rick Owens Fall 2020 men's show. And as you can see, it's rather unlikely that we would get too close to somebody with shoulder pads of that sort. They really are quite dissuasive. So this is how I came to research it. Next slide, please. Middle Ages. This, of course, here you have an illustration of Jean Calvin. For those in Geneva have probably seen his statue in the Parc des Bastions. He's one of the 4 founders of Geneva in the 16th century. And interesting to look at his clothing. You can see that his hat has points at the side which keep a certain distance, the beard which is of course covering the face, and he's even got some shoulder pads there. So he is himself already providing some social distancing in his clothes. Now, he's always considered as a very austere figure, but nevertheless, he said, we cannot abstain from things which seem to serve pleasure more than necessity. So he did recognize the importance of luxury and what it brought to us. He's also, what I should say is that he is in fact at the origin of Geneva's luxury industry, because as he recognized the need for luxury, he recognized that the craftsmen were going to carry on producing. The Geneva craftsmen were very well known at the time for watchmaking, for jewelry, for arts of the table. However, what he did was to forbid people, local citizens, purchasing. So this meant that the craftspeople had to find a new market, and they found this new market overseas. So the produce started to be exported, bought elsewhere, thus the beginning of Geneva's reputation in the luxury field. I should also say that he was obsessed with timekeeping, and if you look around Geneva, you will notice there's clocks all over the place. He wanted Geneva citizens to be regulated like clockwork. So wherever you go in Geneva, you will see a clock and you will know if you're early or late or on time for your appointment. Geneva was really regulated like a monastery. So, oops, something strange happened there. He also introduced these sumptuary laws, which became into effect already 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, even 16th century, 100 years after the death of Calvin, and 6 years after the last plague, outbreak of the plague. There was something like 10% of Geneva citizens who were brought to trial for breaking these sumptuary laws, i.e. for purchasing luxury products, clothing in particular, jewelry in particular, that they didn't have the right to purchase because of their role in society, their position in society. So it's very much a class thing, which we'll see throughout the ages, that this class aspect comes in very strongly. Next slide, please. So let's move into the 17th century, and here we can have a look at the first protective clothing, the first PPE, which was developed by Charles de Lorme, who was physician to many of the European kings at the time. And he developed this, and I'd like to read to you the description of the plague doctor's costume, which was first seen in 1619. The costume involved a coat covered in scented wax, breeches connected to boots, a tucked-in shirt, and a hat and gloves made of goat leather. plague doctors carried a rod, you can see there's a rod, that allowed them to poke at victims or keep them at a distance. They wore spectacles and the mask with its nose 1/2 foot long, shaped like a beak, filled with perfume, with only 2 holes, one on each side near the nostrils. But that can suffice to breathe and carry along with the air one breathes the impression of the herbs enclosed further along in the beak. And Amazon, of course, who's not going to miss a beat on this, is selling a costume, not completely accurate, but nevertheless a costume that you can buy for Halloween and dress up like a plague doctor. Next slide, please. So then we come to the 19th century. What is happening in the 19th century? We have the Industrial Revolution, first of all, in the 1820s. We have huge developments in technology. We have factories springing up. In order to run these factories, we have workers coming in from the country, losing their farms, their country, moving into the cities, working in factories, a huge growing working class. And along with this, we have a great outspread of illnesses of all times. We have cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, of course. And women, particularly to protect themselves, start to wear crinoline. So they start to wear these huge skirts, so huge that they had to have particular chairs to be able to sit down on them. And they are, of course, walking through the streets, and the streets, as we know, are extremely dirty, and they're bringing diseases in the home with them. By the end of the century, it's discovered that bacteria spreads germs, and these are attached to the skirt. And you can see in this rather lovely cartoon, the maid who is cleaning the skirt and trying to get rid of the germs that are being carried along with it. So at the time, we have also the hygienic dress movement comes into place in the 1880s, which also wants to shorten skirts and slim down the silhouette. So that's what's happening at that particular time. And it's quite effective, as we see as we go into the 20th century, that the skirts start to become shorter and the silhouette slimmed down. Next slide, as we move into the 20th century. And here, of course, the big pandemic here is the Spanish flu between 1918 and 1920. Again, the exact statistics for this are not known, but it's thought that there's between 25 and 50 million people who died there. Which is enormous, as in the Middle Ages with the plague, which also contributed to killing between 1/5 and 1/4 of Europeans. So here it was considered your patriotic duty to start to wear masks. What was the quality of the masks? Some were good, some were not, but the essential was to wear a mask. And so here we have even the cats wearing the mask. And in October 1918, wearing a mask became mandatory in some states in the US. Songs were created to prompt the rule, obey the laws and wear the gauze. Protect your jaws from septic pores. After this particular period, we've had the First World War and a pandemic, the fashions are seen to change completely, and we go into the Roaring 20s. And there we have, as we've said, shorter skirts, straighter shape. We have a different look of luxury because this is the beginning of Coco Chanel. So we see paste jewelry instead of real jewelry. We have a much different pared down look, which, as I said, Coco Chanel promoted in particular. And we also have the beginnings of experiences as luxury. So no longer just objects, but experiences as well. That starts to happen in the 1920s. Throughout the 20th century, we will see masks coming back for all sorts of reasons. And we will also see more and more fashion as a spatial barrier, as providing a protection against other people, against diseases and so forth. We looked earlier at the shoulder pad. The shoulder pads already there in the 1930s very prominently, but by the 80s, we see the new businesswoman wearing shoulder pads, high heels, an aggressive stance to show, well, I'm here and I can do this job as well as anyone. By the end of the century, we're going to start to see these doudoons, these anoraks that people are wearing, which should be up in the mountains on ski slopes, and we see them in the city. They're already here in September, and they're very large, voluminous, and they put a lot of space between us and other people. So increasingly, we're going to see this sort of fashion. Hoodies, the same thing, the huge hoodies, which again are keeping people at a distance. The next slide. So in the 21st century, as we said earlier, political crises and global warming. And here already before the pandemic, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen more and more on the catwalks, these type of very protective fashion. Here we've got a plastic hazmat suit on the Maison Margiela. We have Gucci with bullets and arms. We have a lot of the major luxury companies who are using this sort of aspect. Of course, in the Far East, in China as well, masks have been very prevalent, certainly since 2017, to protect against the pollution. So that's very much a direction that we're going to keep on going in, I think, to keep on protecting ourselves. Next one. So finally, as I said in the beginning, taking this quote from Santayana already in 1905, those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. So what are the lessons that we can take from history when we're looking at fashion and luxury? And what we can see, I think what stands out very clearly, is that although they're often considered as not necessary, as frivolous, as something that it's not so important if it carries on, although these are billion-dollar markets, is that nevertheless they're providing a huge amount of important things to our well-being. They're providing us with protection, they're keeping us at a distance from others for social distancing, and at the same time they're providing comfort. And afterwards, of course, joy during difficult and trying times like the times that we've been living through at the moment. I'm sure that many of you have seen after the end of the quarantine in China, the Hermes flagship store, one of their stores in China, sold $2.7 million of luxury goods in one day. So this revenge buying is very much as much a feature today as it was at the time of the sumptuary laws, when people found themselves with so much money and so much inheritance, those who survived, that they were going to start to spend on luxury as much as possible. So luxury is still in there. Many of you have probably observed the queues, nevertheless, outside of Louis Vuitton once the quarantine was over, once the confinement was over. So the joy that it brings is an aspiration and various other things, but very much there. Obviously, the new factor here is sustainability. So in terms of fast fashion, it's a different thing, but for fashion and luxury, it's still very important and brings us a lot. The research, that this is the first time I've really looked at it from the historical point of view. And what I think is very striking as a psychologist is to see how our resilience and therefore our well-being can be increased through fashion and luxury, and how we can feel better about it, which is clearly the case from the revenge buying. We all know when we buy, for example, a new pair of shoes, it gives us a certain buzz that we're happy for quite a long while. So how can we build on this? How can fashion and luxury, Bill Morrison said earlier, the commitment between the client and the designer and the luxury industry in this case, how can we build on this with this personal experience? I think that's an important aspect. And I'm also interested in the influence of cultural differences, particularly between the East and West, because what I've not touched on is that while in the East, luxury is considered with a very positive eye. For example, you give luxury items to your boss, to your family, to your subordinates as a sign of respect. It's very much appreciated, the red and the gold envelopes with a new year and so forth. Here in the West, we have a rather different view of luxury. We have a love-hate relationship with it, which goes right back to ancient Greece. Think of Sparta and Athens as the two reflections. So on the one hand, we have luxury as the source of all evil, as immoral. And on the other hand, we have it as something that creates jobs, which Louis XIV, who was the father of the French luxury industry, wanted to do. A third of Parisian jobs were in the luxury industry. It carries down a craftsmanship and an inheritance which we don't want to lose, which is very precious, particularly in this day. So I'd like to look more at these cultural differences and how they came about and what we can do with them, because I think that that's extremely important too. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor. Anyone please submit your questions in the chat if you have any. And meanwhile, I just wanted to once more summarize that the luxury industry is one of the few which actually benefited from the unfortunate pandemics currently.
It has done, particularly historically, because what distinguishes this pandemic from the past ones, because of the tremendous medical progress and the fact that we do have communications, we're enabled to tell people to social distance and go into quarantine by themselves and so forth. Of course, in the past, it wasn't possible. We had families all sharing the same roof, and we can see in the records that entire families would be wiped out. And so therefore there were so many deaths in these past pandemics that there was a huge inheritance available for a lot of the survivors. So they were able to spend and spend and spend, as they did as we saw with Calvin. But nevertheless, what we're seeing today is that after people have been kept in confinement, have put up with all sorts of hardships and losses of the joys that make our lives worth living, what do we want to do? We do want to go out and spend, and very often on some luxury item, because I think we've all become more aware of the importance of certain things and the unimportance of other things in our lives. And so to buy a cheap item is not going to fill the spot in the same way as a piece of luxury is going to do it.
Yeah. And just the last quick question from Bill Morrison, if we can briefly cover it before we proceed to our last presentation. Will fashion keep repeating itself?
Well, if fashion and luxury in particular keeps repeating itself, because these particular, we looked at those shoulder pads, didn't we? The shoulder pads have kept coming back since the 16th century, and with the situation we're living now, they're not going anywhere. In fact, they're becoming bigger and bigger. So it will repeat itself. There's a certain amount of nostalgia, because the other thing that's come out of this situation is that people are very much comforted by going back into the past, by watching old movies, by listening to old music, things that they've known themselves and which comforted them in the past. And those are going to keep comforting us. And if we look at the fashion luxury, what's coming out now, it's very classical. It's very much the styles that we've had before, which are going to be increasingly popular. We've got very much the 1970s and 1980s here now, and I think they're very much here to stay, yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. That was very interesting, very intriguing to learn that John Calvin is probably responsible for the luxury market in Geneva, but that makes sense because in the 19th century, there was a thesis written by Max Weber, The Protestant Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism. And probably this is one of those John Calvin moments in Geneva and the luxury industry thereof. Thank you so much for your insights into this fascinating topic. We have to move on to the next presentation. And by the way, if you still have any questions for Leslie, please do use the chat box. We will move on to our final presentation, and that is that will be on doing business in special contexts, particularly in underserved communities. And both Ugo, I will let you guys introduce yourself, as well as Godwin. They have done this case study on Lagos, Nigeria. So without further ado, Godwin and Ugo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sudha. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present our work today. We have some slides that we'll just talk through to help you with the story that we're trying to tell. And we will start right at the beginning. We'll just wait a second for that to go to the beginning. Yes. So very quickly, we started this research in Lagos to gain insights that help business leaders in making decisions about their operations in special contexts. If we go on to the next slide, we will see, yes, we will look very briefly at the evolving landscape for businesses to operate in. But first, I'll let Godwin introduce himself, and then I'll let him go on to take this part. Godwin, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Godwin. I'm the founder of Pen Place Schools in Ajegule. I'm also a manager at Akosin group of company. So without further ado, let me go. The landscape for business to operate in its continuity has continuously evolved over the past few years. Due to the pace of technology, which has been increasing over the period of time as a result of technology and globalization. Our work tried to look at the circumstances surrounding small-scale businesses, usually operating in the informal sector, based on special context. Keeping in mind global businesses landscape today, this research was carried out to look at the impact of COVID-19 on businesses in low-income setting, using Ajegule Lagos as a focal point. The objective here is to highlight what engagement models and tools work and how this can be enhanced to increase stakeholders' value. The learning from Ajegule, when coupled with learning from other special contexts, would potentially allow businesses and public sector leaders to have a great understanding of how to develop and implement solutions to meet and satisfy stakeholders' needs. I would like Ugo to continue from there to explain what special context means to us.
Thanks, Godwin. So Godwin sort of just set the scene for the evolving landscape of global business. Next on, it makes sense for us to look at why special contexts are important and some of the major highlights and findings from the research that we did, and I'll just go through these very quickly. Majority of the respondents indicated daily expenses ranging between $1.30 and $2.30. All respondents had mobile devices. Over 70% of the respondents that we engaged indicated that their phones are used for transactions and commercial purposes. And over 60% of the respondents that we engaged indicated that they would be willing to receive only digital forms of payment. I'll take it a step back. So in order to gain these insights, we have done extensive field research in Ajegule. to try and understand what tools and models of engagement local businesses are using. To put Ajegunle in context, Ajegunle is an informal settlement of about 3 million people. It's regarded as one of the largest slums in West Africa, and it is, and has many characteristics that make it a very special context to operate in. And this is because, of course, there's a lot of people, and they all have needs. So there's a tremendous opportunity for businesses to meet these needs. So that's the context that we carried out this piece.
I'm sorry, it's very difficult to hear you for the last 15 seconds. Continue with your microphone.
Can you hear me better?
Yes,
is it better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So I was saying that a community like Ajegunle has a huge population.
Not good at.
And a lot of these people. Just a second. Can you hear me better?
Perfect. Yes.
Yes. So a community like Ajegunle has a huge population, and these people have needs. So there's a tremendous opportunity for businesses to step in and satisfy these needs. But to do that, they need to have a clear understanding of the models of engagement and the tools that are at the disposal in this context. And so what we've seen from the businesses and the individuals that we've engaged, and what the findings highlight is that mobile technology plays a significant role in facilitating trade, and a more significant role than we'd anticipated. I'll give the example of identity management systems. Many people living in this context don't have the typical passport or national ID card or driver's license, the typical things that you would use as the basis for ID management in a community. But mobile phones and mobile numbers are probably the most common and the most respected form of identity. So that was one of the things we found. Another thing we found that was quite interesting to us was the interest to use virtual forms of payment over cash payments. So all the respondents that we engaged said that they would be happy to receive forms of payment over their phone, and over, as I said, 60% of them said they would be happy to receive forms of payment over the phone over any other kind of form of payment. And so for us, it was really interesting seeing how the local businesses have adapted their products and their offerings and their services to meet very specific needs. If we go on to the next slide, we'll see so yes, a lot of the businesses have adapted their offerings to meet specific needs, and you see very sort of fit for purpose solutions emerging. Conscious that we don't have a lot of time, I'll go on to sort of the summary that we'd like to give, which is looking at businesses in special contexts in the sort of broader context of a pandemic, which on its own is a special context. At the moment, the world is currently thinking about what the post-COVID landscape would look like. For businesses, I think we can all agree that this is a make or break point. Of course, we've seen on sort of the big tech side, we've seen many companies grow tremendously because they've taken advantage of all the opportunities from people having to stay at home more. But we've also seen many companies struggle because of the economic impact of the pandemic. So the core thing that we're pulling out of this is that going forward, special contexts have become even more widespread and pronounced, and businesses will need to be proactive and in some cases adaptive to meet the needs of people in these contexts. in summary, thinking about how digital technologies play a role in this, and also alternative models of engagement, like the barter system, which was one of the things we saw very significantly, and then also credit systems, alternative credit systems. Tools and sort of models like this are really what is keeping business going in special contexts, very specifically in the Lagos example, which is in the Lagos Ajegunle example, which is one of the biggest slums in West Africa. So I will stop there. Thank you all very much for the time, and we'd love to hear your questions.
Unmute yourself, yes.
Thank you, Ugo and Godwin, for this paper presentation on doing business in special contexts, particularly the case study in Lagos that you conducted. Any questions? Any questions on this topic? Because this is really interesting from the perspective of international development. Or Ugo and Godwin, I'll give you the floor again. If you have any closing statements, closing remarks on your paper, how would you like to take this further?
So if I can jump in, I think for us, the research has been particularly exciting from the perspective of a business that Godwin and I run. So we co-own Pen Play School in Ajegunle, which is a nursery and primary school. And you can imagine that running a school in a context like that comes with many challenges, but then it also comes with many opportunities. We've been able to take the learnings from this research and apply it to sort of delivering the services that we offer in the school. And so, where we have quite a few alternative solutions. For example, looking at the barter system for payments, looking at credits, looking at how we manage identity systems, given that people don't have the conventional forms of ID. So I think there's a real case for being able to take learnings from being able to take these learnings and apply them to real life businesses that are operating in special contexts. Godwin, would you like to add a quick line?
Not so much, apparently, not so much. Just like you said, doing business in Ajegunle specifically is a little bit tough because you find people who have low income earners who have access to lit and to cash, as in it is very difficult doing business in Ajegunle. So we're looking at the possibility where, as in showcasing, as in where we can possibly, how would I put this? And to cut all the long story short, I feel it has really been tough and tense doing business in Ajegunle specifically. Thanks, Ugo.
Thank you, Godwin, and thank you, Ugo. Anybody else has any comments, questions? I think Professor Kuo, you had a question? Talking about digital technology, in China, WeChat is common currency. Even the beggar on the streets has a QR code. Is this something you wish to take up, Ugo or Godwin?
Yes, in fact, it's something that we're actively working on. We've started to map out what what solutions already exist in Ajegunle, to see sort of, well, we started at the high level. What social media platforms are people using to communicate, to do their marketing? What money transfer platforms are people using? And then sort of are going down into more detail. But that's definitely something that we're interested in and actively looking at. At the moment, there are no systems similar to WeChat, because WeChat is quite holistic in the sense that it offers a broad range of services. But we are actively mapping out, as I said, mapping out what currently exists to find the opportunity for a solution that we can offer ourselves.
Thank you very much, Hugo. I mean, definitely digital technology does have the possibility of leapfrogging many of these development challenges. I'm not an expert on Nigeria or let's say the African context, but in many Asian countries, particularly developing countries, this has been done, where technology has and where you could scale technology and proliferate that, you can have that possibility of leapfrogging various obstacles that you find in the development ladder. So with that, I think we are out of time. We are on time and we are out of time. Thank you so much. First of all, the speakers and to those who are joining us from near and far. Thank you for joining us. I hope you had this opportunity with this research conference. You got to learn something and that you found the discourse and the discussions we had to be meaningful. We will continue with this discourse and discussions. You will see the profiles as well as the papers that the presenters presented on our ONResearch website. So if you're not following, please, you can go to onresearch.ch. And if you go to the link of conferences, you will see the papers as well as the profile of the speakers. And in regards to keeping the conversation moving, please do not forget that on the 21st of October, that is a Wednesday, we'll be hosting our annual research forum, much bigger than the conference in itself, where we will have various teams as well as speakers from both the public sector, the governments and states, international organizations, as well as businesses and the private sector to come and discuss various aspects of this new world order that we are kind of creating post-COVID-19. So once again, from my side and ONResearch, thank you so much for joining and do stay safe. Thank you.